Thank you, Andy, very much indeed. Uh, I'm going to start with the underlying economic problem, what the French call the problématique. I'm going to take you to the general macro conclusion, if you like, which is that we need more investment, and then Dimitri will take you on and tell you what investment we need and how. So if I could have the first slide, please. Thank you. As you can see there, GDP growth at the level of the G7 economies has trended down over the whole of the post-war period. Now, of course, that doesn't contain China and India. If you put them in, it tells you a similar story, but the slowdown starts later. The second point of the slide, of course, is that there was no major recession in the post-war period until the 2008 global financial crisis. Before the World War, real GDP growth was volatile and recessions were common. After World War II, the G7 grouping went for more than 60 years without GDP ever falling. Now, the reasons for this, of course, are multiple. One is that government expenditure, which is intrinsically relatively stable, had increased to about 40% of GDP in most OECD countries, imparting an overall degree of stability. There were the automatic stabilizers, the tendency of government expenditure to rise and government revenues to fall in a recession. And there were some occasions when there were successful discretionary movements of policy, mainly fiscal policy. The lesson from all of this is that through this period, from the 1960s, growth decelerated progressively. Now, part of this may be due to declining catch-up growth, which was so prominent immediately after the war. Other factors, including structural rigidities, became progressively more important. And of course, latterly, there have been other issues too, demographics, which we all know about, demassification, the lightening of GDP, underspending on infrastructure, perhaps some issues concerned with concentration, and some issues concerned with inequality. So that's background. Now, if I could have the next slide, please. As if all that's not enough, as if that slowdown was not enough, now we've been hit by a huge, as Andy says, a huge negative shock. Now, one of the questions for us all at the moment is how quickly do we come out of that? Andy has expressed the interest, and it's a hope that I share, I think we all would, that we come out of it quickly. Unfortunately, no one knows how long this recession will last. Early scenarios simply assume that we'll come out of it quickly. What this slide does is look at the length of past recessionary episodes. Now, for these purposes, a recessionary episode is measured from the time just before the recession starts until the time when GDP gets back to that level, back to where it started from. Now, typically, if you take these bigger recessions, which we've seen ever since the 1920s, these recessionary episodes are quite long. Their duration is almost invariably at least 3 years. Often the episodes last 4 or 5 years and sometimes longer. And in one case, Italy, in 2019, GDP was yet to get back to where it had been in 2007, some 12 years previously. Now, there's nothing set in stone about such numbers, but what it does suggest is that policy response is going to be extremely important. And obviously it wants to keep that response time down as much as it can. So next slide, please. So recapitulating those 2 points, even before COVID-19, the world economy had problems. So it seems reasonable to expect that once it's recovered, it's likely to face the same issues and in spades, unless policy changes. Even before 2008, and most definitely afterwards, the performance of the major economies had become unsatisfactory. GDP growth, as I've shown you, was slow, and so was productivity growth. Furthermore, inflation and nominal interest rates were historically depressed, and most tellingly, so too was the real rate of interest. And the fact that real rates of interest were so low, near zero in so many countries, told us that desired investment worldwide was weak relative to available savings. What the world patently needed was markedly higher investment that would boost demand on the one side and increase supply on the other. So if I can have the next slide, those two phenomena taken together are the super multiplier. Initial investment which is an expenditure, gives rise to successive rounds of expenditure throughout the economy. And the ultimate increase in total spending is thereby greater than the initial first round effect. Those are the key mechanisms for that are shown in the upper part of that diagram. But there's more to the story than that. The increase in investment expenditure not only boosts aggregate demand, it also adds to capacity. And those are the effects shown in the lower part. And the two effects taken together represent or constitute the super multiplier, made famous, of course, by John Hicks. So to the next slide, please, the final slide. So how big are investment multipliers in practice? Well, the answer is that it seems they're helpfully big, likely of the order of 2.5 to 3. Taking first the income expenditure multiplier, its size depends on a number of factors, including the stance of monetary policy, whether or not monetary policy accommodates an increase in investment expenditure, the degree of spare capacity in the economy, and the extent to which successive rounds of expenditure are saved, taxed, or spill over into imports. Estimates of the typical expenditure multiplier, if it's accommodated by monetary policy, lie in the range of 1 to 1.5. And for UK green investments today, something Dimitri will talk about in greater detail, a value towards the upper end of that range seems likely, even probable. So finally, the super multiplier. The size of the super multiplier depends on both the size of the income expenditure multiplier and the efficiency with which the investment is planned, undertaken, and utilized. There are interestingly few estimates of the value of the super multiplier around, but there are some. One set was undertaken by the International Monetary Fund, and another set was undertaken by the OECD using a variety of 3 models for the UK. And if you take all of these together, they were interestingly close from both sources in putting the value of the super multiplier at between 2.5 and 3. In other words, each percentage point of GDP spent on investment can, if it's sustained, be expected to increase UK GDP ultimately by around 2.5 to 3%. That's a very fortunate policy jumping off point. So on that basis, let me now hand over to Dimitri.